This one's really loud.
Yeah, this one's quite loud. If you guys want to stop it, yeah.
Okay, good morning everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning for a session on how a strong civil society can drive climate ambition. So today we're going to explore how communities across so-called Australia are working to promote climate action, to engage with governments, to engage with COP processes, and how this can drive ambition. We're going to look a little at the Article 12 of the Paris Agreement, which is Action for Climate Empowerment, or ACE. And under ACE, governments have made the commitment to engage their citizens on climate through a range of different areas and what's called the 6 elements. So this is climate change education, public awareness, training, public participation, public access to information, and international cooperation. So this really underscores the importance of citizens in engaging in all these processes that shape our future and the future of our planet. And that's what we're really all here for today, right? So you might have seen when you were coming in that there was a protest of local Indigenous communities here. And what they have been trying to do is exactly what ACE is designed to protect: public participation in these big decisions and these big conferences. And where governments have got a responsibility to ensure this, citizens have the right to do it. So they are protecting their democratic right to protest, to enter in this space on the land that is actually theirs, and to be involved in this conference. So we all stand in solidarity with the Indigenous peoples of this land. And I extend that same respect to all Indigenous peoples here and at this conference. So in this session, we're really going to emphasise that equitable climate action only happens when people who are living the impacts of climate are involved in the decisions that affect them. So we've got this fabulous panel of speakers here today. I'm going to only introduce them briefly. Starting from my right is Alice Ridge from the International Women's Development Agency. Akanasi Tuikaba from Pacific Islands Council of South Australia. Rowena Sautatia McDonald from Islands Council of South Australia. TJ Polataivao Fatiatofa II from Pacific Climate Warriors. Oh, I beg your pardon, Georgia, and Georgia Griffiths from SEED. So they will introduce themselves in more depth. But just to kick off, I'd like you all to, perhaps starting with TJ, is to kind of share with us, why is it important for your community and your organisation to be involved in, the big decisions that are being made here this week, this fortnight?
Hello. Before I begin, I'd just like to, as a chief of my maternal grandmother's village, an Indigenous person myself from Samoa, I'd just like to take this opportunity to acknowledge and pay my traditional respects to the traditional owners on the lands on which we're gathering here in my mother tongue. O te avele nei awa noa e whatalofa atu le paia mo le mamalo o te ngata nuu o tātou poto I lunga I ai, o le tātou tiute o te ngata ese ai te ngata asi I lenei whanua e te tū whaatasi ma lātou, I lātou sa alotonga, mo lātou tūmaanga, mo lātou sa ilinga, mo lātou sa alotonga, mo lātou malanga molato whanua, malato waitafe, malato langi ilene atanu o pasila. I just like to pay my traditional respects to the traditional owners on the lands on which we're gathering here today. As an Indigenous person myself from Oceania, specifically Samoa, it is our duty as visitors to this country to stand with Indigenous people in their fight for justice, in their fight for land rights, and in their fight for the Amazon. And I think this morning's action is a very important reminder for all of us, and if we can, to put our bodies on the line, and if we do get the bid in Australia, for us to continue that legacy and that mission to stand in solidarity with First Nations people across so-called Australia. But to answer your question, sorry, Denise, I think it's important for my Pacific community in Brisbane to be in these spaces, both inside and outside, just because we are on the front lines of climate change. First Nations people across Australia are not only on the front lines of extraction, but also on the front lines of climate change alongside with my Pacific communities in the Pacific. And so for those of us who contribute the least to climate change, we are some of the most worst affected. So I think it's important that the people in these spaces understand our realities, our experiences, and I guess learn from it, listen from it, and I guess take it into account when they go into those negotiating spaces to hold the line as well. But so I don't take too much space, I'll pass the mic on to Georgia.
Hello, everybody. I'm Georgia. Is that loud enough? Okay. I'm Georgia from Seed Mob. Yeah, I've been working in campaigns and comms across climate orgs for the last 7 or so years. And yeah, I think it's really, like TJ said, I think it's really apt that we're talking about strong civil societies after what so many Indigenous mob have been doing at this COP over the last, gosh, it's only day 5 of COP, isn't that ridiculous? Yeah, I think it's really important for communities to be able to attend spaces like this. But I think we also have to really acknowledge that all of us in this space right now are really privileged to be here. And you know, taking a step back and thinking about whether we're the voices that should be in these spaces and how do we create spaces for more people to come in. I think, yeah, like TJ said, if the bid comes to Australia, like there's so many voices who are on the front lines right across the Pacific, whether they're on the front lines of fossil fuel extraction or whether they're on the front lines of climate impacts, or as a lot of communities are, on the front lines of both of those. I think it's really important that we make space for them to come in, which is really what I think a lot of people from Australia who don't normally come into COP spaces are here. This COP is to really learn and understand how COPs work so we can take all of that knowledge back to our communities to make sure that if the bid comes to us, that we can engage in these spaces properly. And engage in these spaces both on the inside of like the negotiating rooms, but on the outside in these spaces, in pavilions, in the hallways, but also outside if we can, you know, build up the... Oh no. Yeah, if we can build a massive movement of people that are on the outside, that really influences what happens on the inside, and it shows everybody here what all of our communities are going through and what we're fighting for.
Thanks, Georgia.
Talofa everybody, my name is Rowena Siltatia MacDonald and I'm here from Ghana country, also known as Adelaide in South Australia. I'm here with the Pacific Islands Council of South Australia in partnership with the Velamani project, which is run by diaspora in Sydney. And so this is a youth-led initiative that sees myself and Akanisi here, that she can speak more on. As for why it's important that we're here, I think specifically from the Adelaide context, being that it would be the host state when we get COP31. um, I think it was important for me specifically because I do work in my day job with the Pacific Australian Emerging Leaders, which is a regional network. And in that regional network, I have all these amazing connections across the Pacific and in these conversations, and also with First Nations groups all across so-called Australia. But then when I come back to Adelaide, it feels very disengaged, and there's not enough structural resourcing to make sure that our Pacific communities there are plugged into what's happening across the world, across the region, let alone the world. So this was sort of part of our initial steps, a continuation of the work I've been doing over the past few months, which is to mobilize, activate, educate the people in my locale, so that if COP does come, it's not just this thing that happens. A lot of the conversation happening on the ground has been when the Pacific Islanders come to Adelaide or when they eventually get here, disregarding the fact that I was born in Adelaide. I went to primary school there and then I've moved back, I'm working there. So the fact that the mindset is not quite there yet. So that's both an internal thing to ensure that our people feel welcome and resourced, and also that we're building capacity, but also that the greater Adelaide is ready, not just for COP31, but for the climate movement that has to happen regardless of whether it lands on our shores. So that's me.
Bulavanaka and Nanga, everyone. My name is Akanisi Tuakamba. I am a proud Adamatna Kiwani Aboriginal and Fijian woman from South Australia. My mother's side is from the Northern Flinders Ranges of South Australia, and my father is from Namosi, Fiji. I do also want to acknowledge that I'm a visitor on this land here, and I pay all my respects to the traditional owners of this land that we're all gathering on. And I also want to pay that respect to any other Indigenous peoples in this room that are here today, and acknowledge your cultural wisdom that you carry with you too. And pay my respects to your ancestors and your elders also. I have the privilege to live on Kaurna country also, and which is otherwise known as Adelaide, which will be the next location of COP31, speaking into existence. But I am a part of the Pacific Island Council in South Australia and one of the youth representatives that are here with Rowena today. Still new to the space of global climate change discussions, but look forward to this unique opportunity to learn more and connect with others and really build that capacity for our youth community back in South Australia, and just support the youth in that. I do feel like that these are discussions that are not new to our people though. I feel like these are issues that our communities have been facing on the forefront for many years, and long before COPs have begun. So although I'm new to this, I know that my people carry a lot of wisdom, and I really look forward to the opportunity for it to be in South Australia next year, and for us to be able to really, hold space in that too, rather than travelling many, many miles and many plane rides to be here. That's pretty much it. But yeah, I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for having me as part of the discussion. I think it's really important, and I really want to echo all of the points that you've all raised. I guess for me, the constituency that I feel accountable to is both women in Australia and gender diverse people, but it's also a global feminist movement, and we're in a context where there is enormous backlash to gender equality and women's rights and LGBT rights, and even the word gender has now become contentious in all UN and multilateral negotiations. And so I think that there's a huge importance on lifting up the voices of the people who are most impacted by the patriarchy, and really integrating them into climate discussions. Because we know that at a global level, we're really good at talking about sort of gendered climate impacts. You know, when resources become scarce, women have to travel further to get fuel and water, and they're exposed to GBV. You know, there's all of these statistics. But, you know, this is also true in Australia. Like, gender-based violence increases after bushfires. And we're not as good at talking about it in Australia. And so I think that there's a real need for ongoing and formal mechanisms to consult with Australian women on climate policy. I think we're very good as Australia at talking about gender and climate in other countries. We're very bad at talking about it in the Australian context. And so I think COP31 is a really important opportunity, echoing you all when it comes to the Oceanic Pacific region. It's a really important opportunity, I think, to kind of put the spotlight on what we're not doing in Australia and the conversations that we're not having. And I think in terms of what the global feminist movement brings to this, I think it's a real structural analysis of the climate crisis, because sometimes we can get lost in talking about women and women negotiators and women's representation, and that's all important, but it's not enough to solve climate change. Like, we need a structural analysis. We need to be talking about the interconnections between capitalism and patriarchy and militarism and climate extraction of resources and First Nations lands, and all of these things are deeply interconnected. And if we don't have that structural analysis, we're not going to see the progress that we need on climate action. So what that looks like, I think, is you know, the women and gender constituency. It's the feminist movements around the world, and particularly so strong. This microphone really seems to be going in and out, so we might switch it up. It's on? Yeah, it's on. And then I think it's building up the Australian feminist movement as well to engage in climate change. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks, everyone. I'm sensing some kind of enthusiasm for COP31 in Australia, which is really, just a little bit great to hear. So, you know, you're all coming from, you know, different communities and different constituencies. And I guess what I'm really interested in hearing about is, from your communities and constituencies, when COP31 comes to Australia and to Adelaide and to our region, what are the kind of the big messages that you would like, well, that you would demand that our government raises and promotes in COP31? What are the big issues for you? Might start with you, Rowena.
So big issues that we'd raise for COP31. So the Pacific has been steadfast in their demands for years, longer than my lifetime. And so I'm joining on to that with just the simple messaging around 1.5, fossil fuels, all the rest. But I think locally, the more specific angle that I'm taking is the importance of combining that knowledge with First Nations knowledge. There is a bit of tension on the idea of what counts as a co-presidency when it comes to Australia, when Australia is defined by a colonial system in terms of how we engage with the Pacific. And so one of the concerns I've had on the ground is just how do we take COP in a way that we walk together rather than one over the other, which so happens, very frequently happens to be the case when governments control these kinds of interactions. I think we're seeing a little bit of that here as well in how the conversation around what constitutes an Indigenous COP, what constitutes Indigenous representation. That is probably my main concern on the ground, is the idea that when COP comes and it's a Pacific event, that somehow excludes First Nations people. So I want to make sure that we're very clear about the messaging that it's Pacifica and First Nations, and that there's no absolution of what First Nations counts as in that moment, that we uplift that, and also that Ghana country, if it is on Ghana country, when it is on Ghana country, rather have we consulted the people on Ghana country before we even announced that it was on their country, and also that we have the mindset to not see it as like a state or a capital city, but rather that it is one country within the many hundreds of countries in the so-called Australia. So I think that's important to me.
Thanks very much, Rowena. Georgia, can I go to you? And just picking up on the issue that Rowena raised about access of Indigenous people to these negotiations, do you have any reflections on what a good interaction would look like in Australia?
I mean, I think Rowena kind of nailed it, right? Like, I think we don't always have control over what our government does. But what we do have control over is what we all do as a civil society. And I think you just said it best. Like, we all walk together and we don't walk at all. So, yeah, I think it looks like us as a civil society, like listening to one another, talking to the right people, having the right conversations with the right people, consulting people, and coming up with a plan of how we, I can't think of a better word, but like push one another's agendas and fight for this. Like, we're all fighting for the same end goal, right? So we need to do that together, and that takes a lot of care, and it doesn't always work at the pace that some people would like it to work. It sometimes has to slow down, and you have to do things in the right way. And so I think, yeah, we've got to do a lot of work as a movement of people to make sure that we're working together.
And then I think just building on top of that, I'm not going to repeat what Rowena and Georgia said. They've already kind of hit it on the head. But I think there's a massive educational opportunity as well when it comes to COP. I can guarantee you, like, if we bring COP, we're going to celebrate it when COP 31 happens in South Australia. But the people, like, I just know my community, when we're like, oh, yeah, COP's coming to South Australia, it's such a big opportunity, they're going to be like, what the hell is COP? And so I think we've got to also make sure that there are, in the lead up to it, we have education opportunities that decolonize the climate language that I think everyone in this space is very used to and understands, and breaking it down in a way where, not dumbing it down. I hate when people say dumbing it down. It's more so meeting our communities where our communities are at and bringing them along with us in the journey to COP. And then also recognizing that COP isn't the end destination, but it is part of the destination. And that any of the, I guess, finances that come with it are building up our communities, whether it's First Nations, whether it's Pacific diaspora, whether it's back in the Pacific as well. We're building up our communities so that we're building up capacities for after COP as well. I think that's stuff that has to be part of the conversation. In that conversation, for what does co-presidency look like? What does genuine engagement look like between First Nations, Pacifica, and the government, and then just civil society in general. But yeah, thank you.
Thanks, TJ. Yeah, really, really important questions. Akanisi, from, you are Indigenous Australian and Pacific, and so what does kind of participation mean for your community, and how would you see that working in Adelaide for 31, Ghana country?
I think that participation in these areas and representation is extremely important. Not just, I feel like these spaces can be sometimes, especially in Adelaide or Australia, for our Pacific Islander and Indigenous youth, it can sometimes feel like a space that is not for us. And these are discussions that I had about us without us a lot of times. So, and not in a way that discredits a lot of the ongoing work that a lot of the Pacific Islander community and a lot of the elders and leaders that are doing in this space, and the trailblazers that made it an opportunity for us youth to be here. I do acknowledge a lot of the hard work that they've done to push forward and be on the forefront of these issues and raise awareness for us. But I do feel like that seeing our people in these spaces also is integral, so we can feel that we can also speak and our voices are also heard in these spaces also. I think as a Pacific Islander and an Indigenous Australian woman, I do want to see we want to reiterate a lot of the things that were said about seeing our communities come in solidarity and raise these issues to, I guess, come with a resolution for our people, but in strength, so that I guess it's not just either some voices are not so much heard, because there's so many communities within the Pacific that need to have that platformed also. But yeah, I think it's just having more youth representation, and then I guess like TJ was saying too, decolonizing a lot of the language around it too, so it can feel like a space that youth can actually engage in and speak up in and be involved. But yeah, that's it.
Thank you. I mean, it can be a very difficult space to navigate, right? And, you know, we're dealing with colonial structures, patriarchal structures, exclusionary language. All of these things make it difficult to access something that is difficult to navigate for people who don't face particular kinds of barriers. So, you know, a question that I've got for you, Alice, on this kind of barriers to participation. You know, you work with women and gender diverse communities, and what does participation of women and gender diverse voices mean here? I mean, you know, you kind of look around, there's a lot of women here, right? So what's the difference between a sort of a gender aware or gender sensitive participation and that goes above whether or not you're a woman or gender diverse person?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's super important, and you know, it's also like not all women are feminists. Not all women share an analysis based on gender. You know, I think that's really important to acknowledge. It's not enough to just include women, like, you know, and it's also about which women are at the table, right? Like, if it's just white women who replicate patriarchal ways of thinking, we're not going to get any further. So yeah, I think it's super important to think about participation of women. Not just like, it's not a, what am I trying to say? It's not enough just to kind of do it in a tokenistic way. We really need to have a structural power analysis about, you know, which women are at the table, and then what kind of power do they hold at the table? Do they, you know, is there actually power to influence negotiations, to influence the agenda? You know, and I think so much of this is really replicated in the way that Pacific people, you know, are often, and First Nations people from Australia are often sort of put forward in a, you know, participatory way, but in a way that still, they're still from having power to really influence in a deep way what's happening. Yeah, so I think that's super important. The other thing I just wanted to mention, is accessibility for people with disabilities. Like, this environment is a nightmare as someone who is not neurodiverse and is not hard of hearing and does not have accessibility requirements. I'm finding it super hard to keep my focus, to listen, to be attentive, to be present, because I'm getting 50 text messages every 10 minutes. We can't hear properly because there's all this background noise. There's no ceiling on this pavilion. You know, just like, accessibility is not just ramps, right? It goes so much. It goes so much further beyond that. And Claire Gibellini, who is an Australian woman with disabilities, who's a really powerful advocate for this, was talking about this in a meeting I was in last week, and really talking about the importance of a broad view of accessibility. And this is another one of these issues where Australia is quite strong in the international space. You know, we've been really strong on the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, getting that in place. We've had really strong disability policy in our international policy. And we need to do more domestically. And so when COP31 comes to our region, I would really hope that it's world leading in terms of accessibility.
Thanks, Alice. So, just picking up on a point that many of you have made in different ways. Can you hear at the back? Sorry. Just picking up on a point that many of you have made in different ways, and about the issue of influence. So it's not just enough to be here, but how do we all use our power to be able to actually influence the agenda and influence the decisions? And yesterday I was in this fabulous side event here on women's leadership, and a young woman said, we need a seat at the table, but sometimes we need to be at the head of the table. So how do we, from all of you, I don't know who wants to pick up on this first, but to be at the head of the table means that you are able to shape the agenda, and that your voice is able to not only be heard, but to be able to influence. And in order to do that, you need to be able to have access to the levers of power in these places. So just throwing out the question to anyone who'd like to take it up. To engage with our government in Australia, what would you want to see? What kind of way would you like to engage so that you can be at the head of the table sometimes and not only having a seat at it?
I mean, I think it doesn't start here at COP, right? Like, it's the lead up to COP. It's about, I mean, this is my first COP, so I'm still figuring out how it all works, but you can't come to COP and then suddenly be in on the negotiations. Like, it's all of the work that's done up into it. And so I think, like everyone on this panel has said, it comes down to access and being able to be brought into those conversations and have the like TJ said, like, stop talking in acronyms, because like the COP is just I was going to say a fruit salad, but those like spaghetti letters. It's the spaghetti letters of acronyms. And so like being able to have all of that accessible to people who are on the front lines of living in climate impacts. And so I think it comes down to the government engaging with us to be able to shape what that looks like.
Thank you, Georgia. I think if we just get rid of this notion of the table and head of the table, we dismantle that notion. And I think the government pulls up a mat and they come talanoa with our communities. I think the government needs to come, or whoever that might be, and actually just genuinely engage with communities at communities, not commuting at communities, but communicate where we are at. Because I think it just comes back to that issue of accessibility. If they're like, oh yes, we're having this workshop in some city over here, and then the actual communities that are being disengaged or that are being affected are over there, like thousands of kilometers this way, thousands of kilometers that way. It's inaccessible. We're once again, it's just not it. It's just giving very colonial. It's giving very patronizing. I think the government needs to have genuine people who want to build genuine connections and come meet communities where they're at, so that we can, in the lead up to COP, have something tangible where I guess we are making those decisions collectively, and we are making that decisions with our communities' best interests at the forefront. I think that also looks like a COP30 presidency that isn't dominated by Australia. I think we're hearing that, I don't know, I'm just going to say Bowen wants to be the COP president, and like, might be a good dude, might be a good guy, but if we're going to say it's an Indigenous COP, if we're going to go strength to strength from Indigenous COP here in Brazil, so-called Indigenous COP, and to an Indigenous COP in Australia, then I think like we need to put in the systems in place where we could genuinely have a COP presidency that isn't maybe one or two people, but a collective that represents, I guess, the interests of both the Pacific First Nations and the government as well. Like I said, the table has a limited amount of seats, but the mat is infinite. You can bring as much mats as you can. You can have a talanoa circle that is as big as you want. where everyone genuinely has access and has a voice to give their concerns and make those decisions collectively. But those are just my thoughts. Thank you.
I was also going to say toss the table. No, but I think this does bring up another point, which is something I've noticed a lot in, I guess, any space, because my day job is to do relational advocacy with the government, and then my everything else is unpaid grassroots community organizing. And I think the main thing I keep identifying is that while we have to teach our people the language, NDC, GST, all the rest, I can't even remember them anymore, COP, the thing that we have to teach everyone else is that community comes first, not the agenda. Lots of people only now realizing, especially in Adelaide, only now realizing like, oh, we should engage with Pacific Islanders. And they're putting that ahead of the idea of building the community that the agenda will serve. And that means that everything is backwards. And like when it comes to the table or the head at the table or the map, I've never felt like in myself when I'm moving through the world, I'm never going, oh, what does my local MP think about my actions? Like it's just so disconnected to think that I will answer to the government's intentions or that the government can even reflect what I want out of this. And when I say I mean me, my community, and everybody that I represent. So I think, yeah, bridging that cultural gap, understanding that different systems of governance exist even under the current Australian government is going to help understand how and why First Nations and Pacific people are always at the forefront of these kinds of communities, as well as other marginalized groups, including women and the LGBT community and queer communities. Because there's a reason I think that people who live outside of the mainstream have all of the solutions. It's because you're seeing it from the different perspective. So, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing, which is funding. I think often there's just an expectation that we'll all do this work for free. And I would love it if we lived in a world where that was possible and we didn't need money to pay rent and buy groceries and we could like live a bit more collectively, but that's not the world we live in, so we need funding.
So, you know, what's really struck me about this conversation is that everything to do with participation and influence, it comes down to power, right? It comes down to power. Who has it? Who is excluded? But the real power of communities that are so-called marginalised, because in many ways, these are the communities, you are the communities that hold the power because you hold the truth of the lived experience that you're representing. And so the question that perhaps we need to think about more is how do we join the power of community and the power of people with the power of structure and the power of process. I'd like to just throw it out to all of you here in this event. Firstly, if you've got any questions for this panel, but also any reflections that you've got about, you know, power and access and the things that we've been talking here today.
All right. Thank you very much for those reflections. My name is Beatrice Makwenda. I'm with Trust Africa, and I'm from Malawi. And with the high prospects of COP31 in Australia, I'm wondering what actions also you would take, especially that all of you had mentioned around inclusivity and making sure that at least civil society influences. How would we make it more accessible, more affordable? I think there was a big question around accommodation being an excluding aspect of it, spaces of engagement, and yeah. So how will civil society in Australia also rise up to ensure that the conditions are right to connect with others from the global south and around? And then also I think in the bigger scheme of things is how probably even maybe to say how we deal with the power, it's an aspect on all of society engaging in it. So it's not a women's agenda, youth agenda only. but how do we bring, especially that these being agenda-intensive discussions, you find that if you are not inclusive and maybe creating much stakeholder platforms, others are screwed and are championing their own agenda. How are we integrating, for example, businesses into the conversations that we can all support and rally in? And I think the questions on power, I think points to the fact that our struggles are not necessarily siloed. You are dealing with livelihoods in general, human being in general, and at best, we are looking at dignity. So as we champion the cause to raise ambition or to achieve our aspirations, is to how then do we go beyond silos, these struggles, to say this is a climate agenda, this is a food issue, this is an education agenda, but to look at in totality, how are we showing up and strengthening communities at large. Yeah. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks. I'm going to take that more as an intervention than as a question. Wondering if anyone would like to or riff off that.
Hi, thank you. I think the only thing in there that I heard is about like how CSOs on the ground are going to sort of respond to accommodation and things like that. That's partly what I'm here to figure out, is who has control over that decision, because I've been organizing with grassroots groups, especially about other Pacific Islanders coming to Adelaide, because it's a lot closer, obviously, than this. How we are expecting pretty much most of the Pacific Islands to rock up. So we're trying to like activate our, to educate the people that have the spaces, so churches, community centers, as well as setting up like billeting and people who have spare space, office spaces. But that's one of those things where we've been told to halt a little bit because we don't know who makes that choice. So I'm actually here trying to figure that out. If you know who to ask, please feel free to let me know, because I'm taking that all back.
Thanks.
Hi, thank you so much for the panel. It's been very, very illuminating. Thank you so much for the panel. It's been really illuminating. Thank you all. I was wondering what you all think success in an Australia-Pacific COP31 partnership looks like.
I can start since the working microphone's close to me. There's a couple of things that come to mind, and I'm sure the rest of the panel will have really good ideas too. So for civil society in Australia and in the Pacific, I think a successful COP will look like us not tearing each other apart in this process. I think the second COP, there was a COP bid by Australia. Everyone had dollar signs in their eyes and their elbows out. And I think that there's a real risk that we do more damage to our movements going through this process. And so for me, success looks like actually getting through this stronger rather than weaker. I think I just think that's a real risk and something that I'm trying to be really mindful of and have the long game. Like 12 months, it's going to be over like that. And we have to keep working together forever after that. You know, we still live together. We still live side by side. We have got to like stay together in this process. So that's for like our region, civil society. I think at a policy level, what excites me about COP happening in Australia is that it puts the spotlight on the Australian government. You know, it's not that I want Australia to have an opportunity to be seen as a leader on the world stage on climate change, because I don't think we've earned that. But I do like that it shines a spotlight on Australia and on what we're doing or not doing. But I really think you'll all have like really good ideas, so I'll leave it there.
I think that a successful COP would look like a COP that's centered on like the Indigenous knowledges and Pacifica knowledges. I think that it would look like having Indigenous and Pacific people involved from the start, not just in the consultations. And I think it would be just valuing these knowledges as science and not just as storytelling or cultural add-on. And also just transparency. So when commitments are made at COP, they're being reported back to communities. And these are long-term partnerships, not just short-term partnerships for the purpose of COP. I think that's what that would look like to me.
I don't have an answer. I just have, I guess, checkpoints to see whether it does become that. Checkpoints to see if it will become successful. Or I actually don't want to go into that framing, but more so, if we have a fossil fuel phase out, if that's one of the policies that come out, we are on the way to a successful COP. If we have a just climate transition embedded in policies, we are on the way to a successful COP. If funding goes directly back to First Nations communities with no red tape, no bureaucracy bullshit, none of that crap, and they're able to protect their island homes, they're able to stop extraction in their forests on their countries, we're on the way to a successful COP. And I think a lot of these actions are a lead up to COP. And if we're waiting till the day that COP happens on Ghana country and none of these things have happened, I actually don't think that there's much success to be celebrating. But I think there's worth in celebrating the fact that First Nations communities and Pacific communities have the opportunity to engage with each other on a grassroots level, and we're able to, and civil society organizations in Australia. And I think if we're able to engage with each other and build our connections and have those stronger connections before, during, and after COP, I think that's something successful on our end. But I won't put that success to COP. I think I'll put that success to our way, to our peoples, and I guess our ways of being and our ways of doing. Thank you, Cuba, for the question.
Do we have time for another
We have
question?
time for one very quick final question.
Okay, quick question is that I am so inspired and empowered by seeing the incredible young voices that are here today. As young people that are leading and inheriting responsibilities that serve your community and homes, sorry, this fan. What is one thing as young people that you are doing to continue to protect your spirit and mana in this space? And that keeps you going. Thank you.
I think just being with my community, I think having a good laugh, and I think just eating. I'm not a skinny dude. I love my food, and if I'm with good people, having a good laugh, eating good food, I can continue to come back to this space and lose weight because I'm walking around in very hot, but very tropical Amazon, Brazil.
Yeah. I think community is the biggest thing. I think, people up here on the panel is pretty good community. Just being in touch with everyone and not taking it too seriously all the time. But I think the thing that keeps me going and always keeps me going no matter what it is we're doing is like remembering the yarns and the stories that and why we do the work that we do and what we're fighting for. I think that's the thing that keeps me going and, keeps those long nights and not much sleep okay.
Thank you so much. I think, wait, is this working? Gosh, I have to get real into it. I think one of the reasons why I'm really mobilizing in Adelaide is because I know that it's going to be stressful is an understatement. When COP31 comes to Adelaide, maybe, to Ghana land, it's going to be very stressful. And so my solution to that, in part, is connecting to spaces like these, to other like-minded people, to this panel, for example, I'm going to be on WhatsApp with everyone forever. So, you know, like that kind of connection I think is crucial. And also on a personal note, art. I love drawing, I love painting, I love writing, and sometimes I will feel unsettled for days until I take time to actually sit and process what I'm doing through some kind of artistic medium. So I also encourage those, everyone is creative in some way, find your creative thing, and then that will also help us all get through it together.
Thank you. I love that question. I think that these like topics and discussions that I had here are very heavy and like can weigh really heavy on your mind and spirit, especially as an Indigenous person. Like, and seeing all the injustice and hearing the stories about from other mob too. So, I think that the things that we've done, I think same as TJ, we've been getting lots of feeds and lots of giggles, all of us together. So I'm glad to have that, I guess, community here. And I also have another sister that's from Ghana country that's staying with me and also, so just having that sense of home too and realizing why we're here, remembering our community back home, talking about lots of things that are happening back home in Adelaide and our Ghana country and our South Australian mob. So I think I'm really fortunate to be able to have those two connections, my Aboriginal side and being able to have giggles and feeds too. But yeah.
I think I've aged out of the youth part of your question, but I'll just take the opportunity to say, like, I 100% agree. It's about community and it's about movements. And I'll just put in a plug for, so I'm part of a group that's building a new feminist climate collective in Australia. And we have an event back here today at 5 p.m. talking about that work. So that's what's really getting me through, and would love to see you all there.
Thank you, everyone. We have sadly run out of time. But I'm sure you will all agree with me that when COP31 comes to Australia, if it's the people on this panel that are present and leading the way, we will have what we really need to affect change in Australia. Change for the planet, fossil fuel phase out, a just transition, the rights of Indigenous people, and financing for grassroots movements to really be able to make this happen. So please join me in thanking our panel, and I wish you the best for the rest of COP.